I'm Tim Sharp, and welcome to my course on choral arranging for your choir. This is the third lesson in this course. In the first lesson, I gave an overview to the entire course, which gave sort of my organizing idea for all arranging, and that is the idea of establishing the theme of your arrangement, or the principal piece that you're arranging, establishing it, and then creating variations on it or contrasts to it. That is really what we're working at in composition, is the idea of a unity and diversity, a statement and then variations on that statement. So I'm looking at different ways to do that, and to do that we're looking at elements of music that we use as our toolkit for doing these arranging techniques. As I go through those, I am going through the idea that, first of all, that text, everything is driven from text. We start with the text, we analyze the text, and we go through all the elements of looking into the text in order to really see what's there. I give you tools for doing that, and that's the first step. And our first assignment was to extract the text from the arrangement that you're going to work on and to analyze it using the techniques that I outlined. The second lesson in the musical elements of our arrangement and the tools that we're going to use is in the area of melody. And as I established in the opening introduction to this course, most people think of melody as the central idea of any piece of music. As I said earlier, when you think of a piece of music, the first thing that might come to mind would be the melody. Now, indeed, the rhythm of that melody is embedded in the melody. So when you talk about melody, it also has a rhythm. But most of the time we just think of the tune, or we think of the pitches that are in sequence there that becomes the melody. We looked at all the elements of text to see where we might be able to think about how that applies and what we're going to be applying in terms of accents and length and other issues to melody driven from the text. In this lesson, I want to go into a much more deep dive into the melodic element of the arrangement that you're going to work on in order to see what's there, once again, for us to use. We're going to apply our creativity, our craft, by first looking at the melodic element of your arrangement to see what is there to provide some diversity within the unity of the basic idea that's outlined in the melody. I gave you an assignment, and that was to look at your piece that you're going to arrange and to start thinking of these ideas. And as I outlined, I have a piece that I'm working through as well in this course, and the piece is called How Can I Keep From Singing? In my text lesson, I actually took this text and I pulled it out of the context of the song, and I wrote the text in my notebook so that I could analyze the text. I've done that now, and now I'm looking at just the melody, only the melody of the piece. When I say only the melody, the other elements of this course that we're going to look at will be rhythm, we'll look at harmony, we'll look at texture, and we'll look at timbre, and then finally we'll pull all that together in our final lesson. But this lesson is on melody, and I want to go specifically to the melody of How Can I Keep From Singing as my example of what I'm working through. So let me play that melody for you first, and then I'd like to talk about the elements and how I expect to treat that and explore that in this lesson and offer you these techniques for your own creativity. Here is the actual melody of How Can I Keep From Singing. This is by the writer Robert Lowry, who wrote the text and the tune. Now, when we talk of melody, the first basic element and the smallest element that we want to think about is a motive, an idea or ideas that make up that overall melody. This is the smallest unit and smallest musical unit that we have at our disposal, both in melody, and we'll also talk about motives in rhythm. But right now I want to focus on melodic motives. As I look at this melody, I see some things jump out at me immediately with it. And those bring to mind scales and what you might think of even as a harmonic element. But I want to locate and really focus in on just the melodic part of what I'm seeing here. As I analyze this, it becomes very clear for me that I am dealing with a pure pentatonic scale. We know in scales, we have all kinds of scales that we can work from. We can derive our own scale. In fact, we can make up a scale of succeeding notes and call it the scale of our piece, that if we were writing an original composition. But since I'm doing an arrangement, this is what I am given to work with. This is the original tune. And it's very clear that this is a pentatonic tune. Now, we know that means that you can basically play, as I did this piece, on the black notes on the piano. These are the pentatonic scale of... The next thing that I think of, because of my experience of working with different scales, is I know, fortunately, that any starting place or ending place in a pentatonic scale is going to mean I can overlap the voices and it's going to sound beautifully harmonically. That means I can... I'm just playing random notes within the pentatonic scale and they're going to work. That's going to be a great aid to me as I go through this piece. But the first step for me, of course, was to analyze that and to see that that's what I'm working with. You would want to see the same thing in your melody. What scale passages does it make up? You're going to determine that's a minor scale. That's a harmonic minor scale. That's a melodic minor scale. That's a major scale. Perhaps that's a whole tone scale. That's a chromatic scale. Those are going to be tools in your analysis that are going to come to great play for you as you look at this diversity that we're going to set up after we have the unity of the original idea. So analyze it, see what the melodic or the scale passage reminds you of, and see what is basically the overall glue that's holding that scale together. Those scales are determined by intervals, and what I'm looking for is smaller and larger intervals. I'm looking for the distance between notes for finding out what really is going on with these motives. So I'm going past motive now, and I'm looking at intervals. By the way, when I say the word motive, you look it up in the dictionary, it will have two meanings for you. One will be the meaning that most non-musicians have when you say, what was his motive? Well, that's the reason for doing something. In music, we call it a motive. Well, that's the reason the piece exists, perhaps. So that's a really important word for you to think that motive, whatever we're getting down to as the basic unit here, is going to come to play for you as you think of variations and what can you do. The brilliant aspect of a motive, as I said in our very first introduction, is if you think of a motive that we all know and recognize, such as Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, that little motive drives the entire movement of that symphony, and that little motive is just a third. So look how much Beethoven was able to do with the motive of a third, both melodically and rhythmically, and you see how much potential is in a motive. And that's what we're trying to do here. So I've determined that my motive is embedded into a pentatonic scale melodically. I am now going to look a little bit deeper and see what intervals I am actually playing with in that motive. So what I see first is an interval of a fourth. Is the starting place. And then it moves into a do, re, mi melody. Listen to this. So I'm seeing a rising motive starting with a perfect fourth and going to a do, re, mi scale, all within the pentatonic scale. I get excited when I do that analysis because the moment I see a perfect fourth, I think of other pieces that I know that start with a perfect fourth. That was the interval, for example, that Handel used in Messiah when he said, I know that my Redeemer liveth. I know. He also uses it, and he shall reign for I call that the interval of certainty that Handel uses in Messiah. And he uses all the way through the Messiah. Intervals speak to us as composers and arrangers. They have strength. Back in earlier times, the interval of a fourth or an augmented fourth had very specific meaning. It was called the interval of the devil because it was very eerie sounding, and it is hard to sing actually as an interval, and composers would use it when they wanted to evoke something of mystery or something of diabolical nature. I will not say that all intervals have that sort of specific sort of meaning, but they will evoke ideas to you. I know when I listen to Leonard Bernstein's composition and I hear, that is a large interval of a minor seventh that he starts off on There's a Place for Us someday. And that is an interval of longing. It's an interval of reach. Or if you even go further as How Can I Keep From Singing? Listen to this interval. In the second phrase, he goes, that's a whole octave interval. What a reach. What a big range that he offers to the voice at that point. So those intervals will start speaking to you as you analyze them and pull them out, and they will give you ideas. So that's the first step. Just like we did with text, you want to analyze those motives, and you want to analyze the intervals within the motives and start getting ideas and charting those ideas in your notebook as to things that you might want to use now as you begin to create your arrangement and variations. Now, there are some very classical ways that we look at motives and melodic treatment throughout composition and arranging. All composers have these in our tool chest, and classic composers use them all the time. The reason you don't recognize it is because they are indeed hidden and embedded by the way I'm going to describe how they're treated. But they're inside most thought about compositions and considered compositions as a technique to bring diversity or to bring some sort of contrast to the basic idea. Let me take you through those. You will be surprised at how often you will start recognizing them in other people's compositions when you know that they're there. For example, one way I treat a melodic motive is to repeat it. I can do this. I repeated the motive back to back. We would call that a sequence. And because it's a pentatonic scale, I can actually repeat that motive over and over again, and it will not collide with itself in the harmonic result of that kind of combination. Another way of repeating the motive is to repeat it, but repeat it at different intervals, like this. Or now, what I did was just moved up the pentatonic scale and used that same idea of a rising fourth or a rising note and then three notes that followed as a repetition of both the melodic idea and the harmonic or the rhythmic idea together. In the Chinese scale system, every starting note in a pentatonic scale, they have a name for every pentatonic scale based upon which note that the piece starts with. So in a pentatonic scale, you can have, that would be one name in Chinese. Here I start on the second note. Here I start on the third note. And the fourth. And the fifth. They have a name for each one of those. I call those pentatonic. The Chinese have a name for each one of those scale passages. It's just because there's so much variety in the potential of that depending on where you start the phrase. So it's a great technique to actually repeat the theme and sequence the theme. The next thing that I like to do is to sequence the theme by changing, as I said, the initial note. I can change the beginning of that, and I get what sounds like a new melody, but it was derived from the original melody. And that new melody will actually work with the other melody. It will work as a counter melody. It could work as a descant. And as I'm going to show you when I get to my rhythmic lecture, it can work very, very interestingly as an ostinato, which is a rhythmic pattern of a repeat. For example, I just keep that left hand going on that idea, and I can put something on top of that. The left hand was an ostinato based upon the melodic pattern. So it's a very, very fun technique to use and to experiment with. Another way to treat the melody, and is a classical way in counterpoint, is to actually invert the melody. When I start the melody out like this, I had a fourth and then 3 whole steps in a row. But I can go down a fourth and go. I can invert it and go backwards. It's another fun technique to try with the melody. And of course, as long as you're in pentatonic, which I happen to be in this piece, everything is going to work. Sometimes, of course, in other iterations of that, it may not work as well with your other voices in creating the harmony. And we'll talk about harmony later, but you do get to play with that idea as inversion. We can also, a very exciting technique for me is to lengthen the notes. Instead of, we can double the value. Now, you might not even recognize that as the melody if you augment the value like that, and that gives you another contrast that is remotely recognizable to your listener, but not immediately recognizable. And that's what we're trying to do, is create something that gives interest and varies the original idea. And then another way to do it, of course, would be to shorten the pattern. The augmentation was, but what if I go? I love that idea, particularly if I think about an accompanying figure. Listen to this. So I'm speeding up those notes and creating this little like harp-like accompaniment, which could be a great accompaniment. We'll see if I end up with that, but right now that's the idea that comes to mind when I think about shortening those notes. You can add notes. You can, instead of, you can go. I added a second there at the beginning. That creates just a little bit of a variety. Adding a note to it or taking away a note. Took away 2 notes that time, changed the nature of the piece, but using the original material. With all of that, of course, any combination of those are available to you. Augmentation, diminution, all of those different techniques that we use in composition. So this has given me lots of ideas now that I can start working with as I start to craft my arrangement. And I think these will be your next assignment, is to look at those elements of melody, extract the ideas, use these techniques of repeating, transposing, sequencing, inverting, reversing, lengthening, shortening, adding notes, and reducing notes, and see what you find embedded in the melody that you're going to work on in your arrangement. And then we'll turn to the rhythmic element.